Welcome to EPG Pathshala. The paper we are discussing here is Methodology of Research in Sociology, and we are discussing a specific module titled Methodology in Sociology and Historical Perspective. Social science research methods evolved over a period and have rich historical legacy. In this module, you will learn about the evolution of the appropriate methodology in social science research. Based on certain reasoning and logic, sociologists have developed certain methods to understand social reality. In this module, we will discuss the origin and development of methodology of research in sociology. In this process, we will also deal with some basic arguments of the founding fathers of sociology like Comte, Durkheim and others. Sociology originated in the intellectual ferment of Enlightenment in 18th century Europe. This philosophical and social movement gave rise to many progressive ideas, including the value of reason and science and a commitment to social progress. The principal adherents of the Enlightenment fervently believed that human beings, without recourse to religion and the supernatural, and with the help of reason and science, could account for the course of human history, to explain the socio-economic crisis confronting the European society, and formulate policies to achieve social progress. The French social philosopher Auguste Comte thought that there was a need for a new subject which employs the methods of science, that is, observation, experimentation, and comparison. The model he had for this subject was physics, which had established itself as a model for scientific inquiry. Comte, in fact, initially called the new subject as social physics, but on realizing that the phrase social physics had already been used by a Belgian statistician, Adolphe Quetelet, he invented a new term, sociology, which has two stems, the Latin socius and the Greek logos. Though the term sociology dates from the correspondence of Comte in 1824, it acquired wider public use with the publication of his Cours de philosophie positive. It was through the English philosopher and political economist John Stuart Mill that Comte came to be known to the English-speaking world first. It was Comte who introduced the term positivism into sociology. Positivism lays emphasis on measurement and quantification. It also tended to offer explanations in terms of social structure rather than by reference to human intentions and motives. Comte's conviction was shared by his English counterpart Herbert Spencer. Although Comte visualized the need for and the possibility of sociology as a positive social science, he did not himself apply the positivist methodology to the study of social reality. His vision and aspirations were realized by his compatriot Durkheim, who consistently applied the principles of positivist methodology to the study of human society. Thus, Durkheim can be considered as the first empirical sociologist. Durkheim wrote what is perhaps the first major exposition on research methodology in sociology. His work, The Rules of Sociological Method, is well known and is regarded as a classic. But equally important from the methodological viewpoint are his three seminal empirical works in the positivist tradition, namely The Division of Labor in Society, Suicide, a Study in Sociology, and The Elementary Forms of Religious Life. The ontology of Durkheim's sociology holds society to be an objective reality and the nature of this reality to be sui generis, that is, social reality, what he later termed as social facts, is of its own kind and unique, which cannot be explained by a level of reality that is lower than itself. Durkheim elucidates this by outlining four orders or levels of reality in terms of increasing levels of complexity and interdependence of elements in the following order. They are physical, that is inorganic, biological, that is organic, psychological, that is individual consciousness, and social collective conscience and collective representations. Durkheim elucidated the objective nature of social reality in answering the questions like what is a social fact. He clarified that social fact does not mean any fact having to do with society, as understood in common parlance. He defined social fact in the first chapter of his book The Rules of Sociological Method as every way of acting, fixed or not, capable of exercising on the individual an external constraint, or again every way of acting which is general throughout a given society while at the same time existing in its own right, independent of its individual manifestations. The epistemology of Durkheim's sociology derives from its ontology. Since social reality is objective, it can be studied objectively. This is called empiricism. And since social reality is sui generis, it must be explained only reference to other social reality, not reference lower orders of reality, that is physical, biological, or psychological. This is called sociologism. Non-sociological explanation of social reality results in the fallacy of reductionism. Durkheim was aware that not only is the subject matter of sociology, that is, human beings in society, normative in nature, but the sociologist who studies society, who is a human being too, is normative and subject to biases also. So, how can a human being who is subjective objectively study human beings who are subjective? Durkheim's methodological strategy explicitly disallowed subjective responses of individuals as valid data as they are colored. Obviously, Durkheim precluded subjective dispositions as objective data. He did not accept any data that could be vitiated by the influence of the subject of the study or the scholar as the observer. Accordingly, he eschewed interview method for collecting sociological data. Alternatively, in conformity with phenomenalism, a basic methodological principle of positivism, Durkheim looked for data on reality out there, data that can be influenced neither by the subject of the study nor the scholar studying it. He identified three sets of data that are free of such limitation. They are social statistics, legal codes, and religious dogmas or myths. Each one of Durkheim's major empirical works is based on these sets of objective data. Suicide on social statistics, the division of labor in society on legal codes, the elementary forms of religious life on religious dogmas or myths. Having defined the ontology and epistemology of social facts, Durkheim explained the rules of the method to be followed in their scientific study. The importance of his work, The Rules of Sociological Method, lies in the fact that it was for the first time that a sociologist had written explicitly and exclusively on research methodology to be followed in sociology as a social science. Moreover, this book was published after Durkheim had completed his three important empirical works. Thus, it was an articulation of methodological percepts based on the practice of research. Notwithstanding the criticisms that are leveled against it, the rules is still important as guideline for procedures in sociological study. Durkheim spelled out five stages of social scientific investigation. 1. Definition of the subject matter in terms of some observed characteristics, observation of social facts. 2. Description of normal types after a study of many cases, distinction between the normal and pathological. 3. Classification into species, genera, etc. 4. Comparative and causal investigation of the reasons for variation, explanation of social facts, and 5. To attempt to discover any general laws that might emerge in the course of these various stages, that is, establishment of sociological proof. Radcliffe Brown. The early development of anthropology, especially social anthropology in England, was indelibly influenced by positivism and the methodological insights of Durkheim. Durkheim's ontology emphasized the importance of collectivities and institutions. Where could one observe human beings in interaction with one another under stable conditions, uninfluenced by external forces? The answer was inevitably in tribes, island societies, and isolated and remote villages whose societies and cultures thus became social laboratories. Radcliffe Brown's search for elementary forms of religion, that is, the most primitive and simple religion which is actually known, led him to the Australian Aborigines He firmly believed that studying societies not only should aid us in disengaging their constituent elements but also would facilitate their explanation. Interestingly, the early concept of community was defined as a group of people living in a boundary who shared a we feeling. Community, so viewed, was a concrete entity, not an abstraction or virtual reality that it is now. The isolated and generally insulated communities had several characteristics that were helpful in understanding society and culture. The communities were small in size and lived in compact groups. They were well integrated and cohesive, and they were stable and without change. For many of them, time was not meaningful in the chronological or linear sense, and reckoned time in cyclical terms. Such small and stable communities could be directly observed. Observation of objective reality was a scientific method. This anthropological project, with methodological propositions deriving from positivist inspiration, is well enunciated in Ratcliffe Brown's classic work, which is titled as A Natural Science of Society. At the theoretical level, the related concepts of structure and function implied in Durkheim's sociology were explicitly delineated by Ratcliffe Brown and extended by other anthropologists. The concept of function was further analyzed by Polish British anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski. However, the sustained and deeper engagement of anthropologists with isolated and insulated communities gradually took their methodological orientation away from what Durkheimian positivism prescribed. A key development was studying the community in its existential context, what came to be known in social research as ethnography. The emphasis on holistic understanding in ethnography was in marked contrast to the idea of atomism, which is an important epistemological principle of positivism. An essential component of ethnography was the idea of fieldwork, which involved an extended engagement with the communities, immersion in the life world of the community that is studied. Participant observation emerged as a sine qua non. Participant observation emerged on the lines of ethnography. Over the decades, several methodological innovations have enriched anthropological research and social research. These innovations are today discussed under the rubric qualitative approach. Furthermore, the role of the anthropologist began acquiring new dimensions. Max Weber. The first major step to consciously move away from the positivist tradition was taken by the German philosopher Wilhelm Dilthey, who introduced the idea of hermeneutics and versed him into the philosophy of social sciences. The epistemological thrust of hermeneutics was that human action as an expression of lived experience requires a special method of analysis, that is, interpretation. The interpretation of the action can take place through two modes. One, focusing on the relation of the creator of an act, book, or picture to the interpreter putting himself or herself in the position of the creator to understand the latter's act. The presumption here is that both the creator and the interpreter share a common humanity, that is, both are expressions of the same spirit. 2. The individuals, both the creator and the interpreter, are disregarded, and human action is interpreted in relation to a wider context which gives it meaning. For example, a painting can be understood by reference to the outlook or worldview of the society in which it is produced. Similarly, an analyst can construct such a worldview out of its individual manifestation. The circular relation is called the hermeneutic circle. Dilthey's ideas were developed and extended by his compatriot sociologist Max Weber, who laid the foundation for an alternative to the positivist approach to the study of social reality. Weber reflected on the methodological issues in the social sciences. His emphasis on understanding and the issues involved in it was a major contribution to the methodology of social science. Weber defined sociology as a science which attempts the interpretative understanding of social action in order thereby to arrive at a causal explanation of its cause and effects. His reference to causal explanation may appear to reveal the positivist streak in his thinking, but by shifting the analytical focus on the individual actor, Weber differed from his predecessors, that is Spencer, Marx, Durkheim, whose sociology was based on social structural terms. Even when Weber conceptualized collectivities, it was in terms of social behavior rather than social structure. Weber insists that in order to explain an action, we must interpret it in terms of its subjectively intended meaning, something quite distinct from its objectively valid meaning. That is, explanation of an individual's action in terms of A. The consequences he or she intended to have, his or her purpose, rather than in terms of B. Its actual effects. Verstehen as a method involves grasping the end, that is, how the actor perceives that it can be achieved, by asking the individual or by inferring it by generalizing from our previous knowledge of behavior in society, or both. Here lies the epistemological foundation of interview as a method of data collection, a method in which the responses of the participants in the study to the questions framed by the researcher yields data for understanding the social reality and even generalizing about it. This method has several techniques depending upon the background of the respondents, the size and spread of the sample, and the purpose of research: questionnaire, structured, semi-structured interview schedule, unstructured interview guide, or checklist, etc. The work "The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism" reveals Weber's interest in generalizations, notwithstanding his explicit emphasis on understanding. Weber's ontological assumption was that the behavior of human beings is intelligible in the context of their general conception of existence. Since religious dogmas are an integral part of their worldview, they can render the behavior of individuals intelligible. In fact, Weber went on to argue that religious conceptions are actually determinant of economic behavior and consequently one of the causes of economic change. Methodologically, the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism is important as it exemplified the unity of ideal types for measuring and comparing real-life action for arriving at generalizations. According to Weber, the ideal typical concept helps to develop our skill in imputation in research. It is no hypothesis, but it offers guidance to the construction of hypotheses. It is not a description of reality, but it aims to give unambiguous means of expression to such description. Moreover, in its conceptual purity, ideal type cannot be found empirically anywhere in reality, but is arrived at by the analytical accentuation of certain elements of reality. It is a utopia. Most varied criteria may be used in the construction of an ideal type depending upon researcher's purpose, point of view, values, etc. Incidentally, ideal type does not refer to moral ideals or that ought to be. The Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism is also important methodologically, as validation of its conclusions warranted the use of the method of difference, besides the method of agreement. He relied on comparative method as the alternative way of adducing logical proof, as experimentation has as its basis comparison between the control group and the experimental group, and before and after. This led Weber to undertake a series of historical comparative studies of religion, that is, ancient Judaism, Confucianism, and Taoism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Karl Marx, the multifaceted German scholar, revolutionary, and prophet of communism, contributed significantly to the methodology of social research. He was primarily concerned with the origin and development, structure and functioning, and diagnosis and prognosis. Marx broke away from the mainstream German intellectual tradition of idealism and embraced materialism. Nevertheless, he understood the significance of historical method for understanding human society and the changes it undergoes. He ingeniously brought together history and materialism. To understand Marx's methodological perspective, it must be distinguished from Marxism as a political ideology. It is important to note that Marx himself did not advance his methodological perspective as an ism or an ideology. In fact, Marx never used the expression historical materialism and dialectical materialism. In conformity with the mainstream positivism which was developing as the foundational paradigm for the social sciences, Marx consciously cleared materialism of all its metaphysical strapping. For this, he took recourse to the ancient Greek philosophical tradition of dialectics as the most comprehensive and profound doctrine of development and the richest in content. Hegelian dialectics was considered by Marx to be the greatest achievement of classical German philosophy. Although Marx borrowed dialectics from Hegel, he turned it upside down. For Hegel, thought develops all by itself independently of and despite nature. For Marx, human thought studies and, as it were, photographs dialectics of natural and social development. For Marx, dialectics is a method of studying and understanding things in their real change and development. Dialectics emphasizes the interconnections existing among phenomena and regards the phenomena of the world as processes in constant motion, development, and change. It posits that natural and social changes occur in accordance with certain abstract laws called the laws of dialectics. In his rejection of metaphysics and synthesizing dialectics with materialism, Marx apparently rooted himself firmly in positivism. However, his ontology and epistemology, and therefore his methodology, are different in that Marx committed himself to realism rather than nominalism. He eschewed preconceived notions and arbitrary abstractions. Although the materialist conception of history embodies the ontology and epistemology of Marx's methodology for studying socio-economic reality, nowhere in his writings do we find a comprehensive and systematic discussion on it. It occurs in fragmentary form, scattered in his speeches and all his early works.
In this module, we have discussed the historical emergence of methodology in social science research and more specifically sociology research. You might have observed that sociology as an academic discipline has been characterized by multiple methodological orientations. There is not just one method, but there are different or several methods of social research. Each one of them suggests a particular method for data collection and analysis. However, when a particular method is used in social research, it is necessary to keep the ontological and epistemological assumptions researchers make. If this is not kept in mind, the researcher may arrive at conclusions that may not be sustained.